and they're invisible precisely because we can't see them, we can't touch them now, but they will become true later. They are also, the promises are also in hope, not just in relationship to our final destination, which is actually the case. Normally speaking, hope is about our own personal salvation. So our hope is primarily about God saving our souls. And I think two things that people always have to keep in mind is the first is that your salvation is God's monkey, not yours. The biggest mistake people make is in thinking that I will save myself. We're not capable, and there's two reasons. One is to actually go from our current state to the beatific vision is an infinite gap, and you're not infinite, you can't bridge that gap. Second, that means it has to occur by a grace that can only come from God. Second is that it's normally considered an operating grace, which means it's a grace that God gives to you at your final moments, and it automatically redirects your faculties to Him, and then of course He gives you the lumen gloria so that you can actually sustain the beatific vision and see it. But the biggest mistake that people make is somehow or another that I will save my soul. That's not true. I mean, we talk about that, you have to save your soul, which is, it has to be understood in a very specific way in the sense that our salvation is above our natural capacities. We can't do it. Even with ordinary grace, we can't do it. Christ has to actually give us the graces in order to do it. So the theologians talk about the fact that it's throughout the course of your life, your primary function is to cooperate with God and the grace as they come. We're going to return to that more later in the last conference. But your job is to cooperate with Him, not try and take the lead and control over it, because the more you try and control over it, the less you're going to make spiritual progress. In fact, there comes a specific point in people's spiritual lives where that control over the direction of their spiritual life and their purification and all of that has to be surrendered entirely to God, because we've gotten as far as we can get, and then He has to complete the process. So it's just something, but the point being is that you have to always remember that God desires your salvation. He wants you to be in heaven. And I think that a lot of people today, because their lives are miserable or for a variety of different reasons, they have real questions about whether God is going to provide everything necessary to save them, and He will, as long as you cooperate. And the more you cooperate, the more He's going to give you, and then the more certitude we have about our salvation. St. Thomas says that our salvation on the side of the cause, that is on the side of God, is absolutely certain. On the side of the effect, that is, our understanding of whether we are one of the elect is not. And that's where the virtue of hope helps us. And the reason being is because if God has decided that you are part of the elect, you will be in heaven, period. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean that we still don't have to cooperate. It just means that on our side, we don't know that. And so we have to continue working towards that as a form of cooperation in His work in our salvation. Okay. The reason I'm going into this is because as things progressively get more difficult is that it's going to require a higher levels of hope, right? Not just in that He will deliver other things. So as I mentioned, Our Lady has said that, after the chastisement, there'll be 25 years of good harvest. She also said at Fatima that, that there would be, once the church was consecrated, or once Russia was consecrated, at a certain point, we actually know that from the 1929 apparition that Sister Lucia had with our Lord, that it would be late, that the Pope would actually do it, but it would be late. In fact, the way Christ talks was too late to avert the effects that was supposed to happen, but it would still result in Our Lady's conversion of Russia and in the transformation of the world, basically, after that. But it didn't mean, because popes did it too late, it means we're going to have to go through some pretty horrific stuff in the meantime, right? So, that all being said, there are promises that they're going to have, that they give, in addition to, these good things are going to come. We may or may not get to participate. It depends on whether we survive the chastisement or we survive even the time up to the chastisement. But that we might get to a chance to enjoy some of those effects of God's desiring to give us good things. But it's not just our salvation. It's also, St. Thomas says, the means to the salvation. So it's not our end is to see God face to face. That's our salvation. But the promise is also in relationship to the means, that God will provide everything necessary for our salvation as long as we cooperate. Second, that in the context of that, he will also provide a number of other things that we can have confidence and hope in. That is, as long as we cooperate, he will continue to give us grace to continue advancing in the spiritual life. And also, it doesn't matter how hard or brutal of a situation that we encounter, again, whether it's part of the chastisement or not, because a lot of families are under severe attack right now, and they're going through a lot of tremendous suffering, and it doesn't, but that suffering is ultimately there to purify the family. But it also means that even in the context of that as long as we do our part, God will provide what we need spiritually. And basically what that means is God will always give you sufficient grace to sustain whatever suffering he decides in your life. That's true even going through the chastisement. So even when it's going to feel, emotionally, the lower faculty, it's going to feel like God has abandoned humanity and that we're all desolate and that this is brutal and that there's this massive destruction that's actually happening worldwide, etc. That's true. That can be there, but nevertheless, he will still give us the grace, if it's his will that we get through the chastisement, that he will give us the grace to get through it. But B, he will also give us sufficient grace to grow in holiness and to be purified in the manner in which he wants us to be purified through the chastisement, as long as we cooperate. So part of the virtue of hope is knowing that he is always faithful. He always provides what's ever necessary in our spiritual life for our advance, as long as we cooperate. And it also means that he will provide everything in order for us to survive, not just the chastisement, but also the stuff coming down the pike in relationship to civil authorities and within the church. Okay. And so, again, these things shouldn't bother us, knowing that, God will provide. And if that means that he provides in certain ways and not others, that means there's something that he wants in those areas that he doesn't provide because he's providing something else. What does that mean? There are three kinds of goods. There's goods of the soul, goods of the body, and then in Latin they call it euxtenos, those things that are connected to us. That's our property, the things that we own, or those things that are around us, right? And St. Thomas says that God is willing to sacrifice the latter two for the sake of the first. So he's willing to allow us to be completely stripped of our income, our financial means, to suffer horrifically on those things that are external to us, if it means that it's going to draw us closer to him. This is the whole point of diabolic oppression. In other words, he will allow the demons to afflict people's externals and literally destroy their external life, because in the process they drove closer to him, which is a greater good than if they maintained those lower goods. And it's the same thing with the goods of the body. He might let you suffer some certain things, certain illnesses, in order to draw you closer to him, because his real intention is to use this life as a means by which he's building your merit in heaven and your virtue, so that when you get into heaven, that's what you actually take with you. So if you think about it, so part of hope is knowing that as long as I cooperate with God, he will fashion my soul to make it as beautiful as he wants it to be in its final state in heaven. That's his goal.